I'm currently working through a book by Chomsky titled Language and Mind. It was first published in 2006, but they come from lectures in 2000 or 1967, and Noam Chomsky has updated it over time. I'm only going over the preface to the first, second, and third editions, and then I will probably go under linguistic contributions to the study of the mind past, and then going over natural language, or the meaning and form in natural languages. Concerning the preface to the first edition, the 3 chapters of the book are somewhat elaborated versions of 3 lectures. The Beckman lectures, delivered at the University of California at Berkeley in January of 1967. The first is an attempt to evaluate past contributions to the study of mind that have been based on research and speculation regarding the nature of language. The second is devoted to contemporary developments in linguistics that have a bearing on the study of mind. The third is a highly speculative discussion of directions that the study of language and mind might take in coming years. The 3 lectures are concerned with the past, the present, and the future. Given the state of research into the history of linguistics, even the attempt to evaluate past contributions must be regarded as highly tentative. Modern linguistics shares the delusion, the accurate term, I believe, that the modern behavioral sciences have in some essential respect achieved a transition from speculation to science, and that earlier work can be safely consigned to the antiquarians. Obviously, any rational person will favor rigorous analysis and careful experiment, but to a considerable degree I feel the behavioral sciences are merely mimicking the surface features of the natural sciences. Much of their scientific character has been achieved by a restriction of subject matter and a concentration on rather peripheral issues. Such narrowing of focus can be justified if it leads to achievements of real intellectual significance. But in this case, I think it would be very difficult to show that the narrowing of scope has led to deep and significant results. Furthermore, there has been a natural but unfortunate tendency to extrapolate from the knowledge that has been attained in careful experimental work and rigorous data processing to issues of much wider significance and of great social concern. This is a serious matter. The experts have the responsibility of making clear the actual limits of their understanding and of the results they have so far achieved, and a careful analysis of these limits will demonstrate, I believe, that in virtually every domain of the social and behavioral sciences, the results achieved to date will not support such extrapolation. Such analysis will also show, I believe, that the contributions of earlier thought and speculation cannot be safely neglected, that in large measure they provide an indispensable basis for serious work today. I do not attempt here to justify this point of view in general, but merely assert that it is the point of view underlying the lectures that follow. In the second lecture, I have made no attempt to give a systematic presentation of what has been achieved in linguistic research. Rather, I have concentrated on problems that are at the borderline of research and that still resist solution. Preface to the second edition. The 6 chapters that follow fall into 2 groups. The first 3 constitute the monograph Language and Mind, published in 1968. As the preface to Language and Mind, reprinted below, explains, the 3 essays on linguistic contributions to the study of mind, past, present, and future, are based on the Beckman lectures delivered before a university-wide audience at the University of California, Berkeley, in January of 1967. These essays constitute a unit distinct from the 3 chapters that follow them. Chapter 4, Form and Meaning in Natural Languages, that's the one that I'm going to read, as well as Chapter 1, is the approximate text of a rather informal lecture given in January of 1969 at Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota to an audience consisting largely of high school and college students and teachers. It reviews some of the basic notions presented in Language and Mind and other works, and in addition presents some latter work on semantic interpretation of syntactic structures. This material, I believe, reveals some of the limitations and inadequacies of earlier theory and suggests a distinction or direction in which this theory should be revised. More technical investigations of this and related matters appear in forthcoming monographs of mine, Semantics and Generative Grammar and Conditions on Rules, to be published later in 1972. Chapter 5 is a considerably more technical study exploring in some detail material that is presupposed or only informally developed in language and mind. The intended audience in this case consisted primarily of psychologists and psycholinguists. This chapter, which originally appeared in an appendix to Eric Linenberg's Biological Foundations of Language, is an attempt to give a concise and systematic presentation of the theory of transformational generative grammar and to explore its potential significance for human psychology. The monographs just cited carry the technical investigations further, in part in directions that are briefly indicated in this chapter, which was actually written in 1965 and is therefore the earliest of the essays that are collected here. Chapter 6 was directed to a rather different audience, namely professional philosophers. So first, his first audience consisted largely of high school and college students. It looks like his second lecture was given mainly to psychologists and psycholinguists, and his third lecture was given to professional philosophers. So he's focusing on high school and college students. He's focusing on psychologists and philosophers. This was a contribution to a symposium on linguistics and philosophy held at New York University in April of 1968. The purpose of this lecture was to explore the points of contact between contemporary linguistics and philosophy, in particular, epistemology and philosophy of mind. The suggestion has been made that current work in linguistics has interestingly given insights to offer into the nature of human knowledge, the basis for its acquisition, and the ways it characteristically is used. In part, this essay is concerned with the debate that has arisen over these issues, in part with the issues themselves. There is a certain degree of redundancy in these essays. Chapter 4 and 5 and 6 are each more or less self-contained. Each presupposes very little, and therefore some of the expository sections overlap further with the chapters that constitute language and mind. I hope that these somewhat varying formulations of basic points may prove helpful. In fact, even the simplest and most basic points discussed in these essays have been widely misconstrued. For example, there has been a tendency in popular discussion to confuse deep structure with generative grammar, or with universal grammar. And a number of professional linguists have repeatedly confused what I refer to here as the creative aspect of language use with the recursive property of generative grammars, a very different matter. In the hope that such questions as these will be clarified, I am and have not eliminated redundancies in collecting these essays. Chapters 4 through 6 extend and enlarge upon the ideas and material discussed in the Beckman lectures. All of these essays are concerned primarily with the area of intersection of linguistics, philosophy, and psychology. Their primary purpose is to show how the rather technical study of language structure can contribute to an understanding of human intelligence. I believe in trying to show in these essays that the study of language structure reveals properties of mind that underline the exercise of human mental capacities in normal activities, such as the use of language in the ordinary free and creative fashion. At the cost of a final redundancy, I would like to underscore here the observations in the preface to Language and Mind concerning the so-called behavioral sciences. Currently, there is a good deal of discussion, and not infrequently rather extravagant claims concerning the implications of the behavioral sciences for human affairs. It is important to bear in mind that there are a few non-trivial empirical hypotheses relating to the question of how humans behave and why they act as they do under ordinary circumstances. The reader who undertakes the useful exercise of searching the literature will discover, I believe, that not only that there is little significant scientific knowledge in this domain, but further that the behavioral sciences have commonly insisted upon certain arbitrary methodological restrictions that make it virtually impossible for scientific knowledge of a non-trivial character to be attained. We can begin to see how human knowledge and systems of belief might be acquired in certain areas. The case of language is particularly interesting because language plays an essential role in thinking and human interaction, and because In this case, we can begin to describe the system of knowledge that is attained and to formulate some plausible hypotheses about the intrinsic human capabilities or capacities that make this achievement possible. These glimmerings of understanding are interesting in themselves and suggestive as well for other studies. We can be reasonably certain that the investigation of direct relations between experience and action, between stimuli and responses, will in general be a vain pursuit. In all but the most elementary cases, what a person does depends in large measure on what he knows, believes, and anticipates. A study of human behavior that is not based on at least a tentative formulation of relevant systems of knowledge and belief is predestined to triviality and irrelevance. The study of human language and learning can begin in a serious way only when such a tentative formulation of systems of knowledge and belief is presented. We can then ask by what means these systems are acquired given the data of experience. Similarly, the study of human behavior can hardly be undertaken in a serious way unless we are in a position to ask how what a person does is related to what he or she knows, believes, and expects. Only when we have formulated some tentative hypotheses as to what is learned can we undertake a serious study of human learning. Only when we have formulated some tentative hypotheses as to what has been learned, what is known and believed, can we turn in a serious way to the investigation of behavior. In the case of language, we can present some tentative but rather detailed and complex formulations of what is known, what has been learned by the normal speaker-hearer. For this reason, the study of language seems to me of particular interest for the study of human learning and behavior. But it must be emphasized that language may be a rather special case. Knowledge of the invention of language is normally attained through brief exposure, and the character of the acquired knowledge may be largely predetermined. One would expect that human language should directly reflect the characteristics of human intellectual capacities, that language should be a direct mirror of mind in ways in which other systems of knowledge and belief cannot. Furthermore, even if we were able to account for the acquisition of language along the lines discussed in these essays, we would still be left with the problem of accounting for the normal use of the acquired knowledge. But this problem is at the moment quite intractable. It lies beyond the scope of scientific inquiry. Of course, it would be entirely irrational to argue that certain phenomena and certain problems do not exist, merely because they lie beyond the scope of scientific inquiry. At present, and perhaps intrinsically because of the scope of human intelligence, which after all is itself structured and bounded in ways that are unknown in any detail, given the primitive character of the study of man and society and its general lack of intellectual substance, we can only speculate about the essential and basic factors that enter into human behavior, and it would be quite irresponsible to claim otherwise. Speculation about these matters is quite legitimate, even essential. It should be guided, where this is possible, by such limited and fragmentary knowledge as exists. But speculation should be clearly labeled as such and clearly distinguished from the achievements of scientific inquiry. This is a matter of considerable importance in a society that tends to trust in professional expertise and to rely on professional judgments. The scientist, in particular, has a responsibility to the public in this regard. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Noam Chomsky.